Try again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So welcome to the last panel of the day. When Rose asked me to moderate this panel, I was thrilled for many reasons, but not the least of which, the three people on this panel who I've had the good pleasure to work with in a variety of ways over the last few years, and I can't imagine a better group to come together to discuss these particular set of issues. I won't do any biographical introduction. All of their lives and credits are laid bare for you here in the program. And because I have noticed over the course of the morning that there's a ruthlessness to the time counting, I'm not going to waste anybody's time. So I am going to kick this over directly to Chia-Chia Wang. And just to say, as a way of framing this panel, that we've been charged with discussing approaches for more inclusive state and local policies. And knowing the three panelists, we will hear a variety of approaches, but also more insight than you're likely to find elsewhere. So,
thank you, Tim. Hi, you can all hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. I still need to learn how to operate this. So I just want to do a quick intro. My name is Chia-Chia Wang. I am with the American Friends Service Committee Immigrant Rights Program, and we're just right down the street on Market, 89 Market Street. The American Friends Service Committee has been around for about 100 years, and the Immigrant Rights Program here in Newark has been around for a little over 20 years. And our program focuses on providing legal services, most of the time free, to immigrants who qualify for immigration relief, and then also those who are in detention, and working with local government and also community members to fight anti-immigrant policies at the local, state, and federal level. So we work on immigration reform on the federal level, permanent residency, campaign for TPS and DACA recipients, fighting funding for immigration customs enforcement operations and border patrol. On the state level, we support driver's license and also fair and welcoming or sanctuary policy, and that not just on the federal, on the state level, but also on the local level. So today I want to talk about a really exciting project, and that has ended, but there's a little more work to do, which we hope that we can continue working with Rutgers students to work with the City Council of Newark to pass a policy that would allow people with limited English ability or proficiency to access city services without difficulty, and so that it's part of the the federal law, and it's part of the state law that there shall be no discrimination against somebody's origin on people where they come from, and also it will then comply with the fair and welcoming policy that was adopted about 2 years ago, I think a little over a year ago, by Mayor Baraka. And under that, it not only prohibits the collaboration between local law enforcement and immigration enforcement, but it also says that the city should establish meaningful procedures and policies and to allow immigrant residents to access city services without any difficulty. And then specifically we drafted, or the student fellows drafted a model legislation for the city of Newark to adopt. So I want to talk to you about what we call Language Access Project. Oh, there's no title. Oh, yeah. Okay, you can hear me, right? Yeah. So what is language access? And so basically it is really to establish effective communications by government agencies with limited English proficiency, and we call that LEP population individuals. So on the federal level, there's the Executive Order 13166, and that was, I think, President Clinton signed, I guess, over a decade ago. And that really mandates federal agencies to improve access and, I guess, to these federal programs and activities for people who, as a result of national origin, are limited in their English proficiency. And the order requires federal agencies to examine the services it provides and develop and implement a meaningful plan so that they can access these services without difficulty. So, and also we want to cite the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and that it basically prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin. Because people who were born in a different country and therefore they have a different national origin are oftentimes limited in their English speaking, but that should not prevent them from accessing services that other people would otherwise have no difficulty in receiving. And like I mentioned, Mayor Baraka signed Fair and Welcoming Policy in 2017, and that mandates the city of Newark and all its contractors shall make best effort to provide free language assistance services as required by this order to limited English proficient individuals. So this is the 3-year project that we had, the American Foreign Service Committee had with the law school and also public policy school. And then Professor Tim was part of the matchmaking and contributor for this project to happen or to take place. So Language Access Project is an effort to work with the city to adopt a policy to ensure that LEP immigrants or individuals can access city services without any difficulty. It is a 3-year partnership between the law school and the American Foreign Service Committee. In the first year of this project, a survey was administered to assess the scale of the problem. And the survey was designed in late 2015, and so the project started late 2015 and ended early 2018, just last year. And the survey was implemented in 2016 in appropriate foreign languages, including Spanish, Portuguese, and French. And that's the 3 primary languages spoken by immigrants living in Newark. So the following years, we follow up with data analysis or the student fellows in comparison to get raw and reflective statistics for the city of Newark and draft a model language access policy. And then last year, the language access report was finalized, and it's actually on our website, and that looks like this. You can find it on AFSC's website. It's called Language Access in Newark. So what do we find in Newark? So we found that nearly 40% of the respondents reported they read, write, or speak English not very well or not at all. Survey respondents indicated that services mostly needed were hospitals and doctors, healthcare, right? And followed by public education and transportation. So oftentimes it's immigrant parents who wants to speak to schools about their children's situation or education needs. Respondents reported that their greatest limitation in accessing services has been language, and that's over 41% of respondents identified that broken English and body language is their main form of communication. preferred way of communications, that's one of the questions we ask because we want to find solutions that what will work and what's needed, right, by the immigrants who don't speak English well. So 45% of respondents prefer using on-site interpreter, okay, and followed by translated document, and that's identified by 27% of the respondents. Roughly 42% of respondents claim that the quality of treatment they receive when interacting with public services had a negative impact on them. And so I would like to cite some quotes that our student fellows found or heard from or saw on the survey filled out by immigrants themselves. So finally, we have policy recommendations. So the first being that the City of Newark should adhere to its already established commitment demonstrated in the fair and welcoming policy in place for, that's already in place for its immigrant population by passing and implementing language access legislation. So that's one. And the legislation should provide equity in access to city services for LEP residents of Newark by means of interpretation services, translated documents, and that made easily available for these residents. That's really important. If you translate something and you don't make it easily available, that's pretty, meaningless. And signage, and that notify these residents of the availability of these services. The language access legislation should include periodic oversight. It could be annually, biannually, and a quality control mechanism to ensure effective implementation. So that's sort of the policy, really sort of big general policy recommendation that, by the student fellows. So we had one law student fellow and one public policy fellow. The purpose to select students from two schools is just for them to work in a team and also to provide a slightly different perspective to ensure that policy making can sort of be thorough or be just a little more inclusive. I don't think I have any other slide. So I do want to end with a few quotes that student fellow found, and I think that would tell you why we should have a language access policy in place and how important it is to have a meaningful implementation or a real implementation of such policy. And so the result of not receiving the services in their own language or they didn't understand the information is they feel like sometimes they don't care about you. That's one respondent. And another person said that I often leave places without receiving any attention as a result of my language. It's actually depressing and frustrating. And accessing city services is very, very, very difficult. And so, and some of them felt that they did not feel welcome. And they did not receive that they were not treated well. So and also the authors, the two student fellows, and I found this really nice note from them that I want to share with you. So that they said that, the work required of us in this project has brought us close to the needs of our focused population and has urged us to make positive impact on their behalf. Going into the project, we assume that there will be a portion of the population that is limited in their English proficiency and thus would have difficulty in accessing their local services. We were floored to learn how large a portion of the population there is. We also were disheartened to learn that LEP access to public services was described as nearly impossible. And what also struck us the most is the overwhelming negative impact that this lack of access has had on LEP population. I just want to
So I'll share with you what I say.
So our second speaker is Esder Chong, who's going to speak to us a little bit about driver's license and the roles of licenses in immigrant inclusion in New Jersey.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to stand up here because it just makes me feel more confident for this podium. So to start, I'm not an expert in this licensing bill, driver's license bill that's tabled right now in the House. So with that, I first want to thank the Center for inviting me. This is a great platform to talk about this. And also want to thank Professor Raphael and the panelists. Super humbled to just share the platform with them, these experts, on the realm of immigration policy and activism. But before I go into, I do have slides, but I don't want to use them because as a student, I usually never like when professors put up slides. So to make it more interesting, I'll just talk here. But before I go into my organization, Are You Dreamers, that I'm the president of now, why we joined the Let's Drive New Jersey campaign, what it has to do with higher education in the first place, I want to talk about my parents. And I rarely talk about them when I do interviews with news and press, just because of their confidentiality and their story to tell. But I felt compelled to share this today in the light of this particular discussion on driver's license. So my parents are undocumented. 15 years ago, they came from South Korea to the States to be missionaries. And after the 2008 economic recession, she lost her position. My mom lost her position at a hospital, which left us undocumented. So growing up, I learned the implications of being undocumented from witnessing my parents struggle and hardships and the way that they navigated life in general after that recession, right? So, and the kind of triggering moment for me that ignited this frustration that I connected with undocumented was pretty early. It was before, the whole, before my driver's license. Most people don't get their driver's license, and that's when they realize. But for me, it was late middle school when my mom returned from work injured. So for a while, she commuted via biking to work, 45 minutes there and back because she didn't have a car. You can't get a driver's license undocumented. And this day was when it was really heavily raining and it was windy. And she comes back injured with a fractured right arm on her shoulders. And it needed emergency care clearly, and she knew that because she was a nurse. But she refused to visit the hospital because being undocumented meant being uninsured. And so she treated herself for 6 months with home remedies, right? And I bring this up because that's the reason why I started Are You Dreamers in the first place, and why I'm so enthusiastic on joining this campaign called Let's Drive New Jersey. So Are You Dreamers is a student organization on campus that I founded 3 years ago. It's a student organization that advocates for undocumented students access to higher education for undocumented DACA and TPS folks on and off campus, right? So on the state and national level as well. And we joined the Let's Drive NJ campaign. So what that is it's a coalition of community and advocacy organizations to push to expand access to driver's license in New Jersey. So as many of you, or some may know, 12 states and Washington has already expanded access to driver's license to qualified drivers regardless of their immigration status or citizenship. And I'm going to talk about how, I can't talk about how passing this bill would increase public safety, which is one of the main arguments, how it will help the state's economy, which is another huge argument. But for me, I'm going to focus this presentation on how it benefits New Jersey's students, especially in the realm of higher education. So how much time do I have? 9 minutes, great. So already, when we look at the past, New Jersey has already passed the $15 minimum wage, paid family leave. Last year, the state financial aid bill, when Governor Murphy came here to sign the bill. And so looking next, what is the next policy issue? And that's the driver's license, A4743, because this allows all residents to apply for licensing regardless of citizenship. And I can talk about, again, the impacts of working families, how it impacts 719,000 New Jersey residents, also about the state economy. You can find all the specifics of the bill and the stats on letsdrivenj.org or the New Jersey Policy Perspective. But my interest in advocating for this bill really lies in the compelling argument that it benefits students in pursuing higher education. So just for the sake of numbers, there are 100,000 young dreamers in the state, in New Jersey, 17,400 DACA recipients, right? Which is a program that's hanging on by a thread on judicial injunctions, and they're not receiving any more new applications at this moment. And about 168,000 children with undocumented parents, which is super important. And in talking about students and students who are dreamers, we have to remember that, and I mentioned this in the recent op-ed I wrote with the chancellor, that they go to our schools, they play sports, they participate in campus activities, and they volunteer in communities, all of which I do right now. So the ability to drive legally and safely is essential to the success of achieving and pursuing higher education. And it really impacts all aspects of a student's life, right? Not only attending classes, but participating in student leadership programs, professional development opportunities like internships, providing for their families, because most of them do work part-time and full-time to pay tuition out of pocket to help with living expenses for their families. And just the driver, it seems so simple as just a license, but the driver's license really restricts and adds to the stress on top of the stress we already have on going to school and contributing to the economy, helping our families. And I can especially speak on this because, as I talked about in the beginning, as an undocumented daughter of undocumented parents, I'm constantly worried for their safety. Or if my dad gets pulled over for some menial traffic violation, that could lead to detention and deportation. And I do commute with my dad 2 to 3 days a week to campus because I can't afford to dorm here. I live in New Brunswick. And so 2 years ago, I was a freshman. It was the first week of attending campus here, college here. We were driving back home, commuting back from Newark. We were just like catching up on our days in the car, practicing my Korean with my dad, and we got into an accident. And I just remember being so scared, even if the fault was the drunk driver behind us. But I just remember being so fearful. My dad was like, it was the first time where we looked at each other and thought, this could end in a really bad place. Because the police came and it was this whole drama. And the next few weeks, I genuinely could not focus on classwork or any engagement in student activities. Sorry, whenever I talk about this, I just like, but with that, I mentioned that in my parents' stories because without the ability to commute, I can't participate in school, let alone go to school. And this basic, something as basic as driver's license can determine students' ability to fully engage and pursue higher education. For all, right? Driver's license for all, including my dad, that affects their children who go to college. And it's not, and now that I have more time than I realized, it's not just me, and I want to share this space to discuss 2 students who gave me the permission to share their stories, just using their first names. So Eric is a student graduating this May. He's a DACA recipient. He's graduating with a 4.0 in the School of Public Administration, and at the same time, he's pursuing a master's degree in public admin with the Rutgers Eagleton Fellowship. And he wanted me to share that he uses his driver's license to commute to work, commute to school, to support his family. And without it, it's impossible to pursue higher education and provide for his family. Without DACA being able to give him a driver's license, he wouldn't be where he is today. Another student, Emanuela, she's from Ghana and a first-year student at Rutgers, Newark. She's undocumented, so there is no protection on her at all. She doesn't have DACA or TPS or any form of identification. And she shared with me that she has no choice but use alternative modes of transportation like train, buses, Ubers, which are more expensive and time-consuming when she could be engaging in school activities or studying. And I know I'm ending a little early, but I do want to end with the fact that driver's license for me, Eric, and Emanuela is not just a form of ID. Yes, Emma needs an ID because she's undocumented and has nothing, no form of ID at all, but this bill is really a statement and a validation from the state that New Jersey has full continuing commitment for Dreamers. And this is why I keep sharing my story and that of my parents. And it's really essential now that we share it because of where our national government is now. Like delegitimizing the humanity and value of immigrants, undocumented, DACA, TPS, which is why the focus is really on the state and local, that the state can work against it by equipping us with the necessary tools to fight back, by thriving educationally, academically, and economically via driver's license, right? And that's it for me. I did want to share a lot of numbers because there's so much stats and studies that went into this with New Jersey policy perspective. And you guys can do your, go on, and Erica Nava did a fantastic job on this. And I can answer questions with regarding to numbers later, but that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
The next time Esder tells you she's not an expert on something, please do what I do, which is to roll your eyes and hand her the microphone. Our final panelist is Penny Venetis, who I could go on and on about all the different ways she was engaged with in life in New Jersey, but I'll just pass the microphone to her.
Great.
And there we go.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm happy that I was invited to speak today. I'm the director of the International Human Rights Group here. And you might say, okay, what does international human rights have to do with state solutions to benefit immigrants? Well, the answer is a lot, and I'm going to talk to you about it. So I'm going to go back a few decades and talk about a case that I brought, and it actually has direct relevance to the topic of our conversation today. So if you travel back in time with me 25 years ago, some of you might not have been born. Some of us were younger and sprier. But anyway, about 20 miles away from here, there was a detention center that held immigrants who were stopped at the border. And their feet never touched sort of New Jersey earth, other than being in Newark Airport and then being stopped at customs and then transported to a facility which was operated by ICE's predecessor called INS. And the conditions there were really, really horrendous. Like, imagine your worst nightmare. It was, I'll talk about the conditions in a second, but the people who were taken there were primarily asylum seekers. I would say about 90%, 98% of them were asylum seekers. They were mostly from African countries, although some were from Latin America and some were from South Asia. And they were here legally because you can apply for asylum in the United States, as you all know, and as members of the administration refuse to believe and accept. But anyway, these people had been through just horrendous civil wars. They had been targeted because of their political beliefs. They had been targeted because of their religion. They had been targeted because of their race. They had been targeted because they belonged to certain tribes. And when I say targeted, I don't mean lightly harassed, which is horrible in and of itself, or being called names. I'm talking about they had their ears cut off, or they had their noses cut off, or their entire families were murdered in front of them. And it really took incredible bravery and ingenuity to actually get to the United States. And I had one of the women from Ghana whose family had been completely wiped out. And then she had been thrown in jail for criticizing the president of the country after her family had been wiped out because they, from a rival tribe. She was then thrown in jail and then was repeatedly raped by the people who had jailed her. And while they were taking her to a second facility, she somehow managed to escape. She was thrown in the back of a truck. She somehow managed to walk for miles and find a family to shelter her at great risk to them. And she ended up being put on a coffee ship that ended up in France, a port town in southern France, where she was sleeping on a park bench until someone from Ghana recognized that she might be Ghanaian. And somehow she made it to Newark Airport and ended up in the Elizabeth detention facility. And I give her example just to let you know that these are the folks who, under international law and under domestic law, have a right to apply to stay here, and these are the folks who usually win and who actually get to stay if they show that they were being persecuted because of who they are and what they believed in. So anyway, this detention facility had been formerly a warehouse, and the people who were taken there had suffered severe trauma, were very lucky to be alive, and many of them didn't speak English, so they had no clue. They were never told where they were going. The conditions at this facility were just really, really horrendous. And so picture a large room with picture windows. There are filthy toilets and showers. You're not given cleaning supplies. Your meals are served inches away from these foul-smelling toilets. You have no privacy when you use the bathroom. The meals are often spoiled. If you're a Muslim, you're given pork products. The milk is usually sour and rotten. The guards who work there call you names like African monkey, and they often also stand outside of the picture window, and when you're taking a shower, they hold up numbers to rate your body. Many of the people, particularly the women, had never actually been naked in front of strangers before, and so they didn't shower. So in addition to living in these foul conditions where abuse was being hurled at them, they were also denied toilet paper, they were denied sanitary napkins. When they asked for it, they were hid. And they were denied access to lawyers, they were not taken outside, the lights were on 24 hours a day, and just for fun, the guards would bring police dogs in to terrorize the asylum seekers at 2 or 3 in the morning, and they would have strip searches that really seemed to be done for the entertainment of the guards. So this went on for close to 2 years, and there was a huge riot that took place there. And again, this was near the law school, and I really didn't know it existed. There were some human rights groups that were starting to make noise about the conditions there. So anyway, these folks, they had nothing to lose, so they rioted. They really didn't hurt anybody, they just wanted to get out. And then they were dispersed throughout the country. And they kept calling my office, and it's really interesting, they were calling my office because they wanted their property back. And I was happy to try and help them get their property back, but once I talked to them a little bit more, it was very clear that they really had been severely abused by a private contractor who was getting money from our federal government with our tax dollars, and who the contractor had hired guards who were abusive and were not trained. So what we found in researching this case and trying to bring a lawsuit was that their constitutional rights were essentially non-existent. Because they were stopped at the border, they had no rights, essentially. The only rights they had was, and listen to this standard, the right to be free from gross physical abuse maliciously inflicted. Okay, conditions aren't gross physical abuse, right? I mean, some of them were beaten, but it's not. And the question, is, listen to that standard, the right to be free from gross physical abuse maliciously inflicted. That basically means that somebody is, sort of has malice when they're, beating you up so severely that you suffer serious damage. And as a person, I was abhorred by that standard. As a lawyer, I couldn't believe that this is a standard that we actually had in place for the treatment of immigrants, people who are stopped at the border. It means it really gives free license to people who are detaining them to abuse them. And actually, the several cases that existed where immigrants had bothered to sue, they all lost because unless somebody had been killed or someone had been shot while someone was uttering a racist statement to them. So what we did, working with the students, is come up with a theory. This was, again, 25 years ago, to say that these folks were protected by international human rights law. That if the Constitution wasn't going to protect them, that international law certainly was going to protect them. And it was sort of a novel theory that you could use international law in the United States to bring a lawsuit against U.S. officials. It had never been done before. And we did it, and we actually won. And we established some important principles. It's a first case to find that non-treaty-based U.S. law applied to abuses committed in the U.S. So we didn't cite a treaty. We actually said that there's certain human rights principles that transcend treaties. We won on that issue. It's the first case to find that detention conditions alone can violate international law. That had never been done before, to say that the conditions were so bad that it violated human rights laws that protect us, that transcend treaties. And the third is we established that immigrants who have very limited constitutional rights actually are protected by some law, and that law happened to be international law. So that case really sort of completely changed the conditions and requirements for detaining immigrants. And I'm not saying that they're not bad conditions for detaining immigrants. They really are, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm sure everybody in this room knows that detention centers are really, really awful. And detained immigrants are still mistreated. But now there's an acknowledgement by the federal government that actually there are some guidelines that have to be followed, and that folks who before were not recognized as having any rights actually have rights. So we saw ICE apply actually basically the standards that we had established in JAMA very recently. ICE issued a report, or the Inspector General of ICE issued a report on February 13, 2019, basically talking about Essex County Jail, where in Newark, where immigrants were being detained. And I want to show, there's the one slide I have. What I did is I went through the report yesterday, and I basically lined up the conditions at the Elizabeth Detention Facility where my clients had been detained 25 years ago, and the conditions at Essex County Jail. And really, there are, very, very close similarities, which is to say, well, maybe our lawsuit achieved nothing, because here we are 25 years later, and we still have the same conditions. The difference is that the Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security actually came to the Essex County Jail, and they did an investigation, and they actually found that there had been violations. So again, you can see being served moldy food, the conditions were horrendous, smelly, mold everywhere, dilapidated beds, really horrendous conditions. But the difference is that because of this international lawsuit, you have the Department of Homeland Security basically calling Essex County Jail out, saying this is a violation of the various standards, and they say what we recommend, what they found, and I just am going to read one short paragraph. ICE must ensure the Essex County Correctional Facility complies with detention standards to establish an environment that protects the safety, rights, and health of detainees, including more closely scrutinizing the facility's process for reporting incidents involving detainees, the handling of perishable foods, and the detainees' living conditions. Mitigation and resolution of these issues require ICE's immediate attention and increased engagement with the facility and its operations. So ICE is saying these conditions are unacceptable and you have to fix them. I give this example to say that when you're thinking about advocating on behalf of immigrants, even on the state level, that you should really not rule out using international law. Although it's, you can say, oh, you know, it's sort of too far removed and judges are afraid of it. It really is your friend because the rest of the world actually is much kinder to immigrants than this country is. And there's some really terrific law that has developed on the international level that you can really, really make use of. And although a judge can't quote it as authority, the judge can actually refer to it and be informed by it in making decisions. And also legislators can really be persuaded by what the rest of the world does, particularly in places, in states like New Jersey, where you have many sympathetic legislators who understand, who are perhaps immigrants themselves or the children of immigrants, and who really are on our side as advocates for immigrants. Thank you very much.
So I'm actually going to take the prerogative of...
Sorry, quick point. We're going to have to cut the Q&A short. There's an event at 1:30. Okay, so
So how much
go
time
ahead.
do you
Like 5 minutes. Give her some-
5 minutes, okay. Then I'll make my prerogative a very short prerogative. So it's been a fascinating day with really pragmatic, programmatic, and legal initiatives around inclusionary practices that cover healthcare, educational access, language services, legal services, professional licensure, driver's licenses, all of which strike me as extremely important to address. One of the things that struck me, and it's specifically around the question of driver's licenses, but I think it applies to some of the other things that we discussed, is that for all the arguments that get put forth that are, I think, very important arguments for why driver's licenses need to be issued to people who are undocumented, the one argument I don't see, and I'm wondering if there's, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this, and that is about the social and emotional impact of not enabling people who are undocumented to have driver's license. 16 years old wasn't the case in Esder's situation, but many of the undocumented young people that I know, it's the moment when all of their friends are getting their licenses that they realize, oh my God, I'm undocumented. So we know all the ways, and Esder detailed them, all the ways that puts you at a disadvantage. But in the moment of your life where the only thing that matters is the social engagement and opportunities of your peers, to be told at that moment that you don't stack up, that you can't get a license, that your ability to think about college is in danger. The social and emotional consequences here are tremendous. And it feels to me, and it's felt to me for a while, like there is some hay to be made here in terms of appealing to a broader public. Because it's an experience that we've all had. We've all been 16, you know, about to get our license, about to think about college, about to do all these things. And I'm just curious for the three of you if, with all the attention rightfully being paid to legal solutions and licensure and a variety of very pragmatic approaches, whether this sort of social and emotional piece of, again, to me, I'm not a lawyer, and this is probably why, to me, it's a human rights violation to not allow somebody to get a license at 16, because the ripple effects go across your entire life. Anyway, I'm going to throw that out there.
I just want to make a quick comment, and then I'll turn it over to the experts on the issue. You know, you are the master of this. Really, you can, you know, I think the work that you do is really critical to educate the public. So that's my comment is, you know, maybe you can come up with a creative campaign that can drive this issue home. And then I'll turn it over to the others.
right now that I haven't thought about, but I think the policy and the social, emotional impact goes together. Because if there were driver's license in the first place, we don't have to go through that. But then the second kind of like triggering moment after the driver's license, I think, is applying to colleges. Because that was my like second phase of like, whoa, this is not right. When all these folks were applying to FAFSA and financial aid, and then I couldn't do that. And then in high school you talk, right? I went to a small high school too, or in any friend group, right? Like, oh, did you apply to this college? Did you submit your FAFSA yet? And how much financial aid did you get? And they're all talking about it, and we need to come up with creative avenues to talk about, like, to avoid that conversation. Like, oh, I'm gonna just do it later, or like, oh, I'm just not gonna. I might just go to community college, or like take a gap year or something. And I think that's not talked about as much because there's so much focus on after high school, like the folks in college and higher education already, and not really the high school K-12 aspect of it, which is why like the bridge between the two is so big, and there is no kind of resources in bridging that gap. So that's a conversation to be had.
I think I mentioned a little bit on the, I guess, emotional impact of not receiving services in the language that, immigrants or LEP population understands. Like they don't feel that they are treated well. And I think that just to extend that a little bit, so imagine you have this large immigrant population who are not receiving services or who don't feel welcome. What would be the social impact or larger impact on the city itself? So you're going to see a larger class, I guess, community who don't interact with the outside or who are less likely to reach out when they need something, whether that's police services or fire department services. And then what does that mean? That means that there might be more safety concerns for other people, and that immigrants are not getting the benefit or service that they actually are entitled to, and that they just rely on themselves for to support their children. And I do think that in the long run there is a different set of social impact that we could be looking at, and that we don't see on a sort of daily basis, but we will see more